They abandoned their father in the hospital until the lawyer read his $950 million will. A dying man, left alone in his hospital bed, watches his children walk away without a second glance. They think it's over, that their inheritance is guaranteed. But when the lawyer opens the briefcase, the truth shatters everything they thought they knew. Hidden letters, secret sacrifices, and a shocking family revelation no one saw coming. Suddenly, the fortune isn't just about money, it's about love, betrayal, and one final chance at redemption. What will matter more in the end, the $950 million, or the father they left behind? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds of St. Joseph's Hospital. Henry Whitmore, frail and pale, woke to the steady beeping of his heart monitor. The sound had become his constant companion these past weeks, more reliable than family visits. He lifted a trembling hand to adjust the thin blanket covering his legs. The door to his private room swung open, and Henry's heart quickened despite himself. His 3 children filed in, Jonathan first, as always, then Rebecca, and finally Philip trailing behind. "Good morning, Father." Jonathan's voice carried the practiced warmth he used in business meetings. He set a small vase of flowers on the windowsill without making eye contact. Rebecca smoothed her designer skirt before perching at the edge of the visitor's chair. "The nurse says you're doing better today, which means you might actually live to torture us another decade," Philip mumbled, earning a sharp glance from his sister. Henry's lips curved into what might have been a smile. Even their bitterness was familiar now, almost comforting in its predictability. "The doctor changed my medication." Henry's voice came out rougher than he intended, scratching against his throat. "Says my heart's stronger than they thought." "Well, that's something." Jonathan checked his watch, then looked up with forced brightness. "The real estate market in Chicago is tanking, by the way. Good thing you sold those properties last year." "Always the businessman," Rebecca said, opening her purse and retrieving a small jar. "I brought you some homemade jam. The housekeeper can put it on your toast." Henry nodded. The jam would sit untouched, like the other gifts they brought offerings to ease their guilt rather than comfort him. "How long are they keeping you?" Philip asked, standing by the window, distance in every line of his body. "Another week, maybe more." The silence stretched between them, filled with decades of words unsaid. Henry cleared his throat. "I was wondering if one of you might stay tonight. The nights get long, and..." "Tonight?" Jonathan's eyebrows shot up. "I've got a board meeting for Eastland Development. Been preparing for weeks." Rebecca's fingers twisted in her lap. "Tommy has his piano recital. I promised I'd be there this time." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Philip, who shoved his hands in his pockets. "Can't. Meeting some potential investors about that restaurant idea I told you about." "The one in Detroit?" Henry asked. "Milwaukee," Philip corrected, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "I mentioned it last visit." Henry nodded slowly. "Of course, Milwaukee." Another silence fell, heavier this time. "Well, we should let you rest," Jonathan finally said, straightening his tie. "I'll check in tomorrow by phone." Rebecca stood, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her clothes. "The nurses have my number if you need anything." Philip merely nodded, already edging toward the door. They moved like actors in the familiar play, each knowing their part. Brief touches on his blanket-covered foot, his shoulder, his hand, empty promises to return soon. The door closed behind them. Henry counted their footsteps, Jonathan's confident stride, Rebecca's measured click-clack, Philip's restless shuffle. The sound of their expensive shoes faded down the sterile hallway. Henry turned his face to the window, where the weak sunlight painted patterns on the wall. "I'm already gone, aren't I?" he whispered to himself. Only the heart monitor answered, its steady beeping marking time in a room that suddenly felt too large, too empty. Night settled over St. Joseph's Hospital, like a heavy blanket. The fluorescent lights dimmed to a soft glow as nurses moved quietly through the corridors, their rubber soles squeaking occasionally against the polished floor. The night shift had begun, bringing with it a hush that made the building feel more sacred than clinical. Henry Whitmore woke with a start, a sharp pain shooting through his chest. His hand clutched at his hospital gown as he struggled to breathe through the discomfort. The monitor beside him beeped faster, marking his distress in electronic pulses. "Easy now, Mr. Whitmore." A nurse appeared, adjusting something on his IV line. "I'll get you something for the pain." After she left, Henry stared at the ceiling, the shadows playing across its surface. The emptiness of the day his children's hasty departure pressed down on him heavier than any physical pain. Maybe my children were right, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the machines. I failed as a father. That's not true, Mr. Whitmore. Henry turned his head toward the door. Maria stood there, her weathered face kind in the half-light. She wore simple clothes, a cotton blouse, and comfortable slacks, but carried herself with quiet dignity. For 30 years, she had kept his home in order. And now, in his final chapter, she'd become something more than an employee. Maria, you shouldn't be here so late. She stepped inside, setting her purse on the visitor's chair. Who else would bring you decent pajamas? These hospital gowns are no good for a man of your standing. Henry's attempt at a smile faltered. Standing? Look at me. Abandoned in a hospital bed by my own flesh and blood. Maria pulled the chair closer. They'll come around. They're just hurt. I gave them everything except your heart. Maria's words were gentle but honest. But that doesn't mean you failed, Mr. Whitmore. Henry looked away, shame coloring his features. Do you remember the Morales family, when their house burned down 10 years ago? Maria arranged his pillows as she spoke. Anonymous donation rebuilt their home. But I saw the papers on your desk. That was business, Henry mumbled. And Becky Jenkins? The scholarship that sent her to medical school? Or the veterans program you funded after Philip's friend came back from overseas? Henry's eyes glistened in the dim light. They never knew. Maybe that was the problem. Maria sat beside him, her presence steady and warm. You showed love the only way you knew how, by providing, protecting, solving problems. But from a distance. I didn't know how to be close. Henry's voice cracked. After their mother died. Maria nodded. I know. But you've touched more lives than you realize. Those quiet acts of generosity, they matter. The pain in Henry's chest eased slightly as Maria spoke, reminding him of the good he'd done, the lives he'd changed from the shadows. Not enough to make up for his failures with his children, perhaps, but something real. Will you stay a while? He asked, suddenly afraid of being alone with his regrets. Of course. Maria took his hand in hers, her skin warm against his papery fingers. Henry's eyelids grew heavy as the medication took effect. The weight of the day, the pain, the regrets all seemed lighter with Maria there, her presence tethered to a world outside his mistakes. As he drifted toward sleep, Henry felt Maria's hand still holding his. Through half-closed eyes, he saw her bow her head. Lord, she whispered, give him strength for what's to come, and give his children eyes to see the truth before it's too late. Henry fell asleep to the sound of her gentle prayer, his breathing finally deep and even in the quiet night. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, painting stripes across Henry's bed. The pain medication had worn off, leaving him groggy but alert as he watched a sparrow land briefly on his window ledge before taking flight again. Freedom, he thought. Something he never truly known. The door opened with a soft click. Maria entered, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a young man, early 20s, with broad shoulders and a quiet strength in his posture. His hands, though strong, fidgeted nervously at his sides. Henry recognized him immediately, though they'd seldom been in the same room. Gabriel, Maria's son, Mr. Whitmore, Maria said softly. Gabriel wanted to see you. Henry's gaze fixed on the young man, taking in features he'd watched develop from a distance over the years. The same warm brown eyes as Maria, but there was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his forehead. Gabriel hung back near the door, a bundle of hesitation and purpose. Come closer, son, Henry said, his voice thin but clear. Gabriel took 3 measured steps forward, then stopped at the foot of the bed. He glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragement. Gabriel swallowed hard. Mommy says, you're my daddy. The words hung in the air between them. Henry felt something crack open inside his chest, not pain this time, but a door long sealed shut. He studied Gabriel's face intently, seeing traces of himself in the young man's features. All these years of secret support, anonymous deposits into Maria's account, making sure Gabriel had opportunities while keeping his distance. After what felt like an eternity, Henry gave a weak smile and nodded. Yes, he whispered. I am. Gabriel's shoulders relaxed slightly. He moved to the side of the bed, perching carefully on its edge. I think I always knew, somehow, Gabriel said. The way Mommy would talk about you, the way things we needed just appeared at the right time. Maria slipped quietly from the room, leaving father and son alone. I wanted to thank you, Gabriel continued. College, my first apartment, even that apprenticeship at Martinez Construction. A smile tugged at his lips. Did you think I wouldn't notice it was your company that owned the building? Henry's eyes widened slightly. I've always admired you, Gabriel said, looking down at his calloused hand. Not for the money or the empire you built, but for how you help people quietly. No fanfare, no recognition. You knew about that? Henry's voice was barely audible. I volunteered at the shelter downtown all through high school. The manager told me who really paid for the new kitchen. Gabriel's eyes met Henry's. I kept your secret. I was proud, even though I didn't know why you cared about us. Henry reached out with trembling fingers. Gabriel hesitated, then took his father's hand. I was a coward, Henry said. Your mother was one of my housekeepers. The board, my children, society, none of them would have understood. But you never abandoned us, Gabriel said simply. Not really. You were there in the shadows. Henry felt warmth spread through his chest, different from the pain that had become his constant companion. Gabriel's forgiveness, his understanding it was a gift he'd never expected to receive. All these years, Henry said, I thought I was just easing my conscience. You gave me a chance at a good life, Gabriel replied. I just wish I could have known you better. Henry squeezed his son's hand. For the first time in years, a weak chuckle escaped his lips. The sound surprised them both. Then maybe, he whispered, I didn't fail completely. Later that afternoon, the door opened with purpose. A tall, silver-haired man entered, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked as if it held the secrets of a lifetime. His tailored suit contrasted sharply with the sterile hospital surroundings. Henry, he said, voice measured and professional despite the concern in his eyes. Henry shifted against his pillows. Daniels, right on time, as always. Mr. Daniels pulled a chair close to the bed, nodding politely to Gabriel, who sat in the corner. The lawyer set his briefcase on his lap and clicked it open. I've brought the documents as requested, Daniel said, extracting a thick folder. But given your condition, perhaps we should proceed with reading the will sooner rather than later. Henry shook his head. Not yet. There's something I need to add first. Daniels frowned. Henry, the estate plans are already complex. Any changes now could. The letters, Henry interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. I want my children to hear them, all of them, before anything else happens. The personal letters? Daniels asked, his professional demeanor slipping momentarily. The ones you wrote 5 years ago? Henry nodded. They need to hear the truth, not just about the money, but about everything. Gabriel leaned forward, listening intently as Daniel sighed and removed his glasses. You know, I respect your wishes, but those letters contain revelations that could create resentment, especially in your current state. Your children are already. He paused, searching for a diplomatic word. Distant? Henry offered. Bitter? I'm dying, Daniels. We can speak plainly. The lawyer nodded reluctantly. I worry about their reactions. I've spent decades worrying about their reactions, Henry said. Look where that got us. He gestured weakly around the empty room. Gabriel stood and approached the bed. Mr. Daniels, may I ask something? When the lawyer nodded, Gabriel continued. Is my father really planning to leave his fortune to children who couldn't be bothered to stay with him now? The question hung heavy in the air. Henry reached for Gabriel's hand. It's not about money, Henry said quietly. It's about giving them one last chance. Gabriel's expression softened. But after everything, they're still my children, Henry said. The letters might help them understand why I was the father I was. Not to excuse it, but to explain. Daniels cleared his throat. I'll make the arrangements. The letters will be read before any distribution details are disclosed. He replaced his glasses and began making notes. I assume you want me to do the reading? Please, Henry said. Your voice carries authority they might actually listen to. The lawyer packed his papers carefully and stood. I'll have everything prepared by tomorrow. Try to rest, old friend. After Daniels left, Maria entered with a fresh pitcher of water. She moved to Henry's side, gently straightening his blanket and adjusting his pillows. Gabriel told me about the letters, she said softly, her hands working with practiced care. It's brave what you're doing, or foolish, Henry muttered. Maria smoothed a wrinkle from the blanket. Your children will come back, sir, she whispered, conviction warming her voice. Henry turned his face toward the window, where afternoon shadows were lengthening across the hospital grounds. His expression remained doubtful, but something flickered in his tired eyes, the faintest spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the drafty room. Rebecca Whitmore's dining room gleamed with polished mahogany and crystal. Outside, evening shadows crept across the manicured lawn of her mansion, but inside, tension electrified the air as three siblings sat around a table that could have comfortably seated 16. This is ridiculous. Jonathan drummed his fingers against the tabletop. I have meetings scheduled all week. Daniels can't just summon us like we're his employees. Philip slouched in his chair, tie loosened, and sleeves rolled up. You'd think Dad would be more considerate, even on his deathbed. He gave a humorless laugh. But consideration was never his strong suit, was it? Rebecca poured herself another glass of wine. Whatever this is about, I hope it's quick. I have the charity gala this weekend, and the committee expects me there. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, another family heirloom that Rebecca had claimed years ago. You realize what this means, don't you? Jonathan finally said, straightening his already perfect tie. He's ready to distribute the estate. Philip snorted. About time. I could use the cash. I'm sure you could, Jonathan replied with a thin smile. How much do you owe this time? Another failed business venture? Or was it gambling? Not all of us had daddy secretly covering our business debts, Philip shot back. Some of us actually faced consequences for our mistakes. Jonathan's face reddened. My business employs 300 people. It creates actual value. I deserve the largest share for carrying on the Whitmore legacy. Rebecca set her glass down hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim. Legacy? Please. I gave up my career to raise children while you two were playing entrepreneurs and playboys. I was the one who showed up at every family event he couldn't be bothered to attend. Oh yes, poor Rebecca, Philip mocked. Living in this palace with your country club membership and your staff of what 8 people? Such sacrifice. My children barely knew their grandfather, Rebecca snapped. That's the real cost. Do you know what it's like to explain to a 6-year-old why Grandpa sent a check instead of coming to their birthday party? Jonathan waved his hand dismissively. We all have our sob stories. The point is, I've done the most with what he gave me. The real estate holdings should naturally come to me. And what about the stock portfolio? Philip leaned forward. The vacation properties? I should have the house in Aspen, Rebecca insisted. I'm the only one who ever used it. The doorbell chimed, interrupting their escalating demands. The housekeeper appeared moments later, followed by a uniformed chauffeur holding a sealed envelope. For Miss Whitmore and her brothers, he announced formally. From Mr. Daniels. Rebecca snatched the envelope, tearing it open as the chauffeur withdrew. Her eyes scanned the heavy stationery, her expression hardening. What does it say? Jonathan demanded. Rebecca cleared her throat and read aloud. You are required to be present at St. Joseph's Hospital tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The will cannot be read without your attendance. The hospital? Philip grimaced. Why can't Daniels come here? Because Dad's still alive, you idiot, Jonathan snapped. Rebecca folded the letter carefully, her manicured fingernails pressing sharp creases into the paper. None of them spoke the obvious that, in their hour of squabbling over their inheritance, not one had mentioned their father's condition or expressed any concern for the man who lay dying across town. The automatic doors of St. Joseph's Hospital slid open with a soft hiss. Jonathan checked his watch and frowned. 9:15. Daniels should appreciate that I canceled my quarterly review for this. He strolled through the lobby, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum. Rebecca followed, sunglasses perched on her head despite the fluorescent lighting. I had to reschedule my hair appointment. Do you know how long it takes to get on Carlos' calendar? Philip trudged behind them, hands shoved in his pockets. Let's get this over with. Hospitals give me the creeps. The elevator ride to the 5th floor passed in stiff silence. When they reached room 507, Jonathan pushed the door open without knocking. Sorry we're late, but traffic was. His words died as he took in the scene. Henry lay propped against pillows, looking frailer than the day before. Beside him sat Maria, her weathered hands folded in her lap. But it was a young man on Henry's other side that made Jonathan stop short tall, with Henry's jawline but Maria's gentle eyes. Rebecca gasped. Philip bumped into her from behind. What's the holdup? Philip grumbled, then peered around her. Who's that? The young man stood, shoulders straight, but hands fidgeting slightly at his sides. Hello, I'm Gabriel. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Maria spoke softly. Children, this is my son. Your son? Rebecca echoed, stepping into the room. What's he doing here? Gabriel swallowed hard. I'm here because... He glanced at Henry, who gave a slight nod. Because Henry is my father. The room went still. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Jonathan's eyes narrowed to slits. That's absurd, Jonathan said coldly. Dad, what kind of joke is this? Henry's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His eyes, still sharp despite his weakened state, moved from Jonathan to Rebecca to Philip, pleading for understanding. Philip let out a low whistle. Well, guess the old man has secrets after all. This is preposterous, Rebecca hissed. Our father would never. Your father did, Maria interrupted, her voice firm despite its softness. And Gabriel has known the truth for years. So you've been waiting for him to die so you could stake your claim? Jonathan advanced toward Gabriel, who stood his ground. I've wanted nothing from him except to know him, Gabriel said quietly. The money means nothing to me. How convenient, Rebecca sneered. The mysterious son appears just as the will is being read. Henry lifted a trembling hand, trying to speak, but his strength failed him. He sank back against the pillows, distress evident in his eyes. I think you should leave, Maria said, standing protectively between Gabriel and the siblings. Your father needs rest. Our father needs to explain himself, Jonathan shot back. Gabriel placed a gentle hand on Henry's shoulder. It's okay. We can talk about this later. Philip tugged at Jonathan's sleeve. Come on. Daniels is waiting. He'll sort this out. The siblings backed out of the room, fury and confusion etched on their faces. They stormed down the corridor to the small waiting area where Mr. Daniels sat reviewing documents, his leather briefcase at his feet. What is the meaning of this? Jonathan demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet space. That woman's son claims to be our brother. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. Did you know about this? Has everyone been lying to us? Is he in the will? Philip asked bluntly. Because if Dad's been hiding a secret son all these years, who knows what else he's hiding? Mr. Daniels calmly gathered his papers and placed them in his briefcase before looking up at the siblings. All will be explained in due time, he said, his voice as measured as a metronome. Now, shall we discuss the conditions of your father's will? The hospital conference room felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that made even breathing seem intrusive. Afternoon sunlight streamed through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the polished table where Mr. Daniels placed a cream-colored envelope with deliberate care. Jonathan sat rigidly, his back not touching the chair. Rebecca smoothed her skirt repeatedly, a nervous habit from childhood. Philip slouched in his seat, feigning indifference though his bouncing knee betrayed him. Against the wall, Gabriel and Maria stood quietly. Gabriel's hands were clasped behind his back, his expression solemn but composed. Maria's eyes never left the envelope. Before we discuss the conditions of inheritance, Mr. Daniels began, adjusting his glasses. Your father instructed me to read several personal letters. He broke the wax seal bearing the Whitmore family crest. This first one is addressed to all three of you. The paper rustled as he unfolded it, clearing his throat before reading in his measured baritone. My children, if you're hearing this, I've either passed on or am no longer able to speak these truths myself. I write not to defend my failures as a father, but to share what you never saw behind closed doors. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Philip's legs stopped bouncing. Jonathan, you believed I cared only for success, not for you. What you never knew was that when Meridian Investments collapsed in 2008, the $1.2 million debt you thought was forgiven was paid by me anonymously through 3 separate accounts to preserve your pride. Jonathan's face drained of color. His fingers gripped the armrests. I sat outside your office the night you thought you lost everything. I heard you weeping. It broke me, son. But you needed to stand on your own or believe you had. Mr. Daniels paused, turning the page. Jonathan stared at the table, unblinking. Rebecca, when Thomas left you with little Emma, you thought I was too busy to visit. The truth is, the hospital bills you believed insurance covered came from my personal account. The night nurse you thought the hospital provided was paid for 3 months by me. Rebecca's hand froze mid-motion on her skirt. Her lips parted slightly. I sat in the hospital parking lot many nights, wanting to come in, but knowing my presence would only remind you of what you saw as my failings. Instead, I made sure you had what you needed to stand strong. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Philip, you assumed I never noticed your struggles. But the 3 times you faced jail time, the DUI in college, the bar fight in Seattle, the gambling debts in Vegas, I was there, speaking to judges, making arrangements, covering what needed covering. Philip sank lower in his chair. His face flushed. Not to enable you, son, but to give you chances to find your way. The job you found at Carson Development came through my old friend Tom Carson, who promised to mentor you without revealing my involvement. The room felt airless now. Gabriel shifted his weight but remained silent, his eyes moving between the siblings' faces. You 3 believed I measured love in dollars and achievements. Perhaps that's my greatest failure, that you never saw how I ached with every tear you shed, how I celebrated every triumph you thought I missed, how I longed for the courage to simply hold you when words failed me. Mr. Daniels' voice softened as he read the final lines. You thought I gave you nothing. In truth, I gave you everything, and perhaps too much. For in sheltering you from pain, I may have prevented you from seeing love standing right before you. The letter ended there. Mr. Daniels carefully refolded it and placed it back in the envelope. No one spoke. No one moved. The siblings sat frozen, their certainties about their father crumbling like sand castles at high tide. The conference room grew dimmer as evening shadows stretched across the walls. Mr. Daniels switched on a lamp, its warm glow creating a small island of light around the table. The siblings remained stunned into silence, each lost in private reflection about the father they thought they knew. Daniels cleared his throat and opened his briefcase again, removing a thick folder bound with a red ribbon. We now come to the actual terms of the will, he said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. And I must inform you that Henry Whitmore has chosen an unconventional approach to her inheritance. Jonathan straightened, suddenly alert. What does that mean, exactly? It means, Daniel said, untying the ribbon with deliberate care, that the $950 million estate is not being directly transferred to any of you. That's absurd. Philip slammed his palm on the table. He can, and he has. Daniel's voice remained level but took on a steely edge. Your father has established that before any of you can receive your portion of the inheritance, you must each complete a series of acts of service within the community. Rebecca let out a humorless laugh. Community service? Like criminals? Like people learning what truly mattered to your father, Daniels corrected. He removed a document and began reading. I, Henry Whitmore, being of sound mind, hereby establish that my children must complete specific acts of compassion and service before receiving their inheritance. These acts will be supervised and verified by my attorney. Should any child refuse or fail to complete these tasks, their portion of the estate will be forfeited to the charitable foundations listed in Appendix C. This is manipulation from beyond the grave. Jonathan's face had turned scarlet. We're successful adults with businesses to run, not teenagers needing life lessons. Philip pushed back from the table. I'm calling my lawyer. This can't possibly be legal. I assure you, it is entirely legal. Daniels remained unruffled. I helped draft it myself, and it's being reviewed by the top estate attorneys in the country. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. How long will these tasks take? Approximately 6 weeks, if performed diligently. 6 weeks? Philip exploded. To jump through hoops like trained animals? Gabriel, who had been silently observing from the side of the room, stepped forward into the pool of lamplight. I'll do it with you. All heads turned toward him. You're not even in the will, Jonathan sneered. Gabriel shrugged, his expression earnest. Maybe not. But if I can make time to honor your father's wishes without getting anything in return, what excuse do you have? The challenge hung in the air, simple but devastating. The first task begins tomorrow, Daniel said, closing his folder. You will report at 7 a.m. to the New Hope shelter on 42nd Street. A homeless shelter? Rebecca's voice rose in pitch. You can't be serious. Completely serious. Daniel stood, gathering his materials. A shelter your father founded anonymously 15 years ago and has supported with over $20 million of his personal funds. I have a board meeting tomorrow, Jonathan protested weakly. Then I suggest you reschedule. Daniels handed each sibling a card with an address. 7 a.m. Casual clothing only, please. Philip crumpled the card in his fist. Rebecca stared at hers as if it might bite. Jonathan tapped his against the table, his jaw working silently. Gabriel took his card with a quiet thank you, tucking it carefully into his pocket. As Daniels packed up his briefcase, the siblings exchanged horrified glances, the full reality of their situation sinking in. Gabriel simply nodded, a faint smile touching his lips as he turned to help Maria with her coat. A persistent drizzle fell from the gray morning sky, turning the downtown sidewalks slick and gloomy. The New Hope shelter stood between a pawn shop and an abandoned building, its faded blue sign barely visible in the rain. Jonathan arrived first, glaring at the dismal surroundings from his idling luxury SUV before stepping reluctantly into the downpour. His Italian leather shoes splashed through a puddle, and he muttered a curse under his breath. Rebecca pulled up next, having swapped her usual designer wear for what she considered casual. Still expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater that cost more than most shelter residents would see in a month. Philip trudged up on foot, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the rain. Gabriel was already there, helping an elderly man with a walker navigate the shelter's front steps. You're all on time. Good. Mr. Daniels stood under the awning, clipboard in hand. Let's go inside. The interior smelled of bleach and something cooking, a mixture of cabbage and potatoes. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating worn linoleum floors and mismatched tables. A dozen volunteers moved about, setting up for breakfast, dark circles under their eyes. These folks have been here since 5, Daniels explained. Some work night shifts and come straight here to volunteer. Philip snorted. Lucky us joining the party. A harried woman with graying hair approached. You must be the new volunteers. I'm Nancy. We need help in the kitchen immediately. Breakfast service starts in 20 minutes and we're short-staffed today. Before the siblings could protest, they were separated and assigned tasks. Jonathan found himself behind the serving counter, a ladle in his hand and a pot of oatmeal before him. His first attempt to serve ended with oatmeal splattering across the counter. Bit less of a scoop, bit more of a gentle pour, coached an elderly volunteer beside him, demonstrating with practiced ease. Across the room, Philip wrinkled his nose as he collected used trays, each dirty dish seeming to personally offend him. This is ridiculous, he muttered, dropping a stack of plates into the wash bin with a clatter. Rebecca stood frozen as a young mother approached her station, a toddler balanced on her hip and a 4-year-old clinging to her leg. Could I have a little more for my kids? The woman asked, her voice barely audible. We haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Rebecca stared at the woman, not much younger than herself, but with deep lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes. Of course. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she filled the bowl to the brim with soup. Do you need anything else? For the children? Meanwhile, Gabriel moved through the room with natural ease, chatting with residents, remembering names, asking about job interviews or health concerns. He knelt to high-five children and helped elderly guests find seats, his genuine smile never faltering. As the morning progressed, the shelter filled with the hum of conversation and the scrape of spoons against bowls. Rebecca found herself stationed at the children's table, helping a volunteer read a story while the parents ate in peace. A little girl with braids and missing front teeth tugged at Rebecca's sweater. Thank you for my soup, pretty lady. It was the bestest soup ever. Rebecca blinked rapidly as the child wrapped thin arms around her waist in an impulsive hug. By early afternoon, the siblings stumbled out into the rain again, now merely a light mist. Their clothes were stained, their hands raw from washing dishes, their feet aching from standing. Rebecca paused on the sidewalk, turning to look back at the shelter's faded blue sign. Something unfamiliar twisted in her chest. Not quite guilt, not quite pride, but something in between. She caught Gabriel watching her, his expression gentle and knowing. "Ready to go?" he asked. Rebecca nodded slowly, her eyes still on the shelter door. "Yes," she said quietly. "For now." Sunlight broke through the clouds as the Whitmore siblings arrived at the Eastside Community Youth Center the following afternoon. The modest brick building sat wedged between apartment complexes in one of the city's struggling neighborhoods. Finance mentoring? Jonathan straightened his tie, a hint of smugness returning to his features. Finally, something I can actually contribute to. You know, I closed a 7-figure deal last quarter that... Save it, Philip cut in. Nobody here cares about your deals. Mr. Daniels gestured toward the entrance. The program director is expecting you inside. A woman with salt and pepper hair greeted them in the lobby. I'm Director Wells. Jonathan, you'll be working with our teen financial literacy group. The rest of you are helping with the building renovation project in the back. Jonathan's confidence swelled as he followed her to a classroom where 8 teenagers lounged in plastic chairs, phones in hand, expressions ranging from bored to suspicious. Everyone, this is Mr. Whitmore. He's going to teach you about financial planning today. Jonathan flashed his boardroom smile. Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Capital Investments. I manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions and... A boy with a faded hoodie rolled his eyes. Great. Another rich dude telling us to stop buying coffee. Laughter rippled through the room. Jonathan's smile faltered. Look, I'm just trying to help you understand how money works in the real world. Your real world. A girl with bright blue braids countered. Not ours. Jonathan launched into his prepared speech about compound interest and investment strategies, but noticed the teens exchanging glances or staring at their phones. His voice trailed off mid-sentence. Is there something you actually want to learn about money? He asked, frustration evident. A thin boy in the back raised his hand tentatively. My mom says we lost our house because of a loan shark. What does that mean? The room fell silent. Jonathan saw the genuine concern in the boy's eyes. What's your name? Jonathan asked softly. Marcus. Marcus, your family probably fell victim to predatory lending. These are loans with unfair terms that target vulnerable people. The words felt like ash in Jonathan's mouth as memory surfaced. Deals he'd orchestrated with similar predatory terms. Clients he'd pushed into high-risk investments for his own commission. Can you explain how that works? Marcus asked. So it doesn't happen again? Jonathan pulled up a chair, sat down at their level, and loosened his tie. Yes, I can show you exactly what to watch out for. For the next 2 hours, Jonathan forgot about impressing anyone. He explained interest rates and balloon payments in plain language. He showed them how to read the fine print and recognize warning signs. When Director Wells poked her head in to announce the end of the session, the teens protested. 5 more minutes, Marcus pleaded. He's showing us how to make a basic budget. Jonathan looked at his watch, surprised to find it was nearly 6 p.m. I can stay if you all can. By the time they finished, darkness had fallen outside. The teens filed out, several stopping to thank Jonathan. Marcus lingered. My mom works nights, he said quietly. Would you mind if I came back next week with more questions? Jonathan felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. I'd be honored. Outside in the parking lot, his siblings waited impatiently by their cars. What took so long? Rebecca demanded. Jonathan walked past them, keys dangling from his fingers, his expression distant and thoughtful. I actually helped today, he murmured, more to himself than to them. I actually helped. Rebecca arrived at the shelter before her brothers the next morning, surprising herself with her eagerness. Last night, she tossed and turned, thinking about the little girl who'd hugged her. Something had stirred within her, something she hadn't felt in years. She hung her designer coat on a hook and tied an apron around her waist. The volunteer coordinator looked up in surprise. You're early, Mrs. Whitmore. I thought I'd get started before my brothers arrive. The shelter was quieter in the morning. A few families sat at tables eating breakfast. Rebecca's eyes were drawn to a young woman in the corner, struggling to feed a toddler while balancing an infant on her lap. The baby wailed as cereal scattered across the floor. Rebecca approached without thinking. Need an extra hand? Relief washed over the woman's exhausted face. Could you hold Emma just for a minute? The baby was in Rebecca's arms before she could respond. The infant's cry subsided as Rebecca instinctively swayed, patting her back in a rhythm her body remembered from years ago. I'm Leah, the young mother said, helping her toddler with a spoonful of cereal. Rebecca. She smiled down at the infant, who gazed up with curious eyes. How old? 4 months, and Tyler's almost 3. Leah's voice cracked. Their dad left when I told him about Emma. Said one kid was enough trouble. Rebecca's throat tightened. I remember those days. My daughter's 17 now, but when she was born, I felt so alone. Leah looked up sharply. But you are so put together. You have money, nice clothes. Money doesn't fix everything, Rebecca sat down, still cradling Emma. After Charlotte was born, I had terrible postpartum depression. My husband was building his practice, always working. My mother lived across the country. What about your father? Henry, right? The volunteers mentioned he founded this place. Rebecca paused, memory surfacing. I thought he didn't care. He never said much when I called crying. He just listened, then asked if I needed anything practical. Sometimes listening is all someone can offer, Leah said, wiping Tyler's mouth. I was so angry at his silence. Rebecca bounced Emma gently. I wanted him to drop everything and come help. Instead, he sent a check to hire a night nurse. That sounds amazing, actually. It was, but I wanted emotional support, not just money. Rebecca hesitated. But now I wonder if that was his way of showing love solving practical problems, because he didn't know how to fix the emotional ones. They talked through the morning. Rebecca helped feed the baby, laughing when Emma spit up on her silk blouse. They swapped stories about sleepless nights and first steps. For once, Rebecca wasn't Rebecca Whitmore, successful real estate developer. She was just another mother who understood the bone-deep exhaustion and fierce love that came with parenthood. When it was time to leave, Leah stood awkwardly. Thanks for today. It's been so long since someone just understood. Rebecca hugged her tight. Emma squished gently between them. I'll come back tomorrow. Maybe bring some things for the kids? You don't have to. I want to. Outside, Rebecca blinked in the midday sun, surprised to find Gabriel leaning against the building. His quiet smile told her he'd been watching. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. Gabriel pushed off the wall. Just nice to see the real Rebecca Whitmore. She turned away to hide the unexpected warmth in her cheeks. For the first time in decades, she felt like herself again, not the brittle, polished version she'd become, but the woman who remembered what it meant to care. The sprawling Veterans Hospital stood like a fortress against the afternoon sky. Philip dragged his feet behind Jonathan and Rebecca as they followed Daniels through the automatic doors. This is a complete waste of time, Philip muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. We've done enough community service to last a lifetime. Rebecca shot him a warning look. Would it kill you to show some respect for once? Respect? Philip snorted. For what? Dad's manipulative guilt trip from beyond the grave? Gabriel, who had been walking quietly beside them, stopped abruptly. These men and women sacrificed everything so you could stand here complaining about listening to their stories for an hour. Philip's face flushed, but he fell silent as a nurse in blue scrubs approached. You must be the Whitmores, she said, consulting her clipboard. We've assigned each of you to different veterans. Mr. Philip, you'll be with Sergeant James Calloway in room 412. Philip rolled his eyes when she turned away. Great, let's get this over with. Room 412 was bathed in afternoon sunlight. A man about Philip's age sat in a wheelchair by the window, his empty pant legs neatly folded and pinned. Despite his missing limbs, he had the solid build of someone who had once been powerful. You must be my visitor, the man said without turning. Pull up a chair if you want. Philip hesitated, then grabbed a plastic chair from against the wall. I'm Philip Whitmore. James Calloway. Everyone calls me Cal. He finally turned, revealing a face marked with scars that tracked down his neck and disappeared beneath his t-shirt. "You don't want to be here," Philip started. "What? It's written all over your face." Cal's eyes were clear, direct. "That's fine. I'm used to making people uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Philip lied, shifting in his seat. Cal laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Sure you are. So was I when I first came back. Couldn't stand seeing the pity in everyone's eyes." Philip found himself nodding. "I hate when people look at me like that too. Why would they pity you? You've got both legs and more money than God, from what I hear." Philip stiffened, ready to snap back with his usual sarcasm, but something in Cal's straightforward gaze stopped him. "My father," Philip said finally. "Everyone thinks he was this great man, but they didn't know him like I did." Cal wheeled himself closer. "Tell me about him." The request was so simple, so free of judgment that Philip found himself talking. About growing up in Henry's shadow, about feeling like a disappointment, about the time he'd been arrested for drunk driving at 19, terrified of his father's reaction. "He never even yelled," Philip said, staring at his hands. "Just paid the lawyer and told me to be more careful." "Sounds like he cared," Cal observed. "He fixed the problem with money. That's not caring." Cal was quiet for a moment. "When I lost my legs, I was furious at everyone. My family wanted to help, but I pushed them away. Thought they couldn't possibly understand." He gestured toward a photo on his nightstand, Cal in uniform with his arms around an older couple. "My biggest regret isn't losing my legs. It's the year I wasted being angry instead of letting my parents love me the only way they knew how." Philip swallowed hard. "The bravest thing I ever did wasn't in combat," Cal continued. "It was the day I finally called my dad and said I was sorry." For hours, Philip listened as Cal talked about courage, regret, and family. For the first time in years, Philip didn't interrupt or deflect with sarcasm. He just listened. When the nurse finally came to tell him time was up, Philip stood awkwardly. "I could come back tomorrow, if that's okay." "I'll be here," Cal said with a half smile. Philip walked out of the Veterans Hospital without waiting for his siblings, his usual swagger absent, his mind replaying Cal's words about forgiveness being the hardest battle of all. Evening shadows stretched across Henry's hospital room as the machines hummed their steady rhythm. Maria sat in the chair beside his bed, her hands busy with knitting while she kept him company. "How are they doing?" Henry's voice was thin but eager. He'd been waiting all day to hear about his children. Maria set her knitting aside and leaned forward. "Better than I expected, Mr. Whitmore." A gentle smile crossed her weathered face. "Philip came back from the Veterans Hospital yesterday looking like he's seen a ghost. Been quiet ever since." "Quiet? Philip?" Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. "I know. Miracle, isn't it?" Maria chuckled. "And Rebecca, she's gone back to the shelter 3 times now. Says she's helping a young mother find proper housing." Henry closed his eyes, absorbing this information. "And Jonathan? That boy has been teaching those teenagers like he was born for it. One of them called him yesterday, can you believe it? Asked for advice about a job interview." A tear slipped down Henry's cheek. Maria pretended not to notice, handing him a tissue with practiced discretion. "They're changing," Henry whispered. The door opened and Gabriel entered, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Evening, Mr. Whitmore. Mom." He placed the flowers in the empty vase by the window. "Gabriel." Henry's face brightened. "Tell me everything." Gabriel pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed. "Well, you wouldn't believe what happened today. We were all at the community center, and Philip actually helped Jonathan set up the projector for his financial literacy class." "Without complaining?" Maria asked incredulously. "Not one sarcastic comment." Gabriel grinned. "And then Rebecca showed up with homemade cookies for everyone. Said she got the recipe from that young mother at the shelter." Henry's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. "Are they still fighting about the will?" "That's the best part." Gabriel leaned closer. "I haven't heard them mention money in 2 days." Rebecca was telling stories about when they were kids, and Philip actually laughed, not that fake laugh he does at parties, but a real one. Maria nodded. "They sat together in the cafeteria yesterday, all 3 of them, just talking." "About what?" Henry asked. Gabriel smiled. "About you, actually." Jonathan remembered how you taught him to fish when he was 7. Said you were so patient even though he tangled the line about 20 times. He remembers that? Henry's voice cracked. They're remembering a lot of things, Gabriel said softly. Good things. The evening nurse came in to check Henry's vitals, smiling at the small gathering. Someone's looking better today, she observed, noting his improved color. After she left, Gabriel continued sharing small victories, how Jonathan and Philip had exchanged phone numbers with some of the veterans, how Rebecca had shown Gabriel childhood photos, including him in their memories, as if he'd always been there. Last night, Gabriel said, they asked me to have dinner with them tomorrow. All 3 of them, together. Henry's tired eyes gleamed with something that had been missing for years' hope. I should go, Maria said, gathering her knitting. You need your rest. She kissed Henry's forehead and squeezed Gabriel's shoulder before slipping out of the room. In the quiet that followed, Henry reached for Gabriel's hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was surprisingly firm. Maybe it isn't too late, he whispered, his eyes fixed on Gabriel's face. Maybe my last gift to them will be each other. The hospital cafeteria wasn't known for its ambiance, but Mr. Daniels had somehow transformed a corner of it into something almost cozy. A round table covered with a cloth that wasn't standard issue, sterile white, stood near the windows. Small flower arrangements and battery-operated candles created the illusion of a proper dining room. This island unexpected, Jonathan said, straightening his tie as they all gathered around the table. Gabriel arrived last, hesitating at the edge of their circle until Rebecca spotted him. Gabriel, come sit here. She patted the chair beside her, surprising even herself with the warmth in her voice. Mr. Daniels poured water for everyone. Henry wanted you all to have a proper meal together. The hospital has arranged a special menu. Philip snorted. Special hospital food is still hospital food. The awkward silence that followed felt thick enough to cut with the butter knives laid out before them. Everyone stared at their empty plates. So, Rebecca finally said, breaking the tension. I found out today that the young mother I've been helping at the shelter, Melissa, has a degree in accounting. Can you believe she's been unable to find work just because she doesn't have childcare? Jonathan perked up. Really? My firm has remote positions available, and a daycare center on site for days when staff need to come in. You'd consider hiring her? Rebecca's eyes widened. Why not? Send me her resume. Philip looked between his siblings with surprise. Since when do you two collaborate on anything? Things change, Rebecca said softly. Their meals arrived certainly a step above regular cafeteria fare. As they ate, Gabriel shared stories of growing up watching Henry from afar, not knowing they were related but always feeling a strange connection. He came to every one of my school plays, Gabriel said. I thought he was just being nice to my mom's employer, but he never missed a single one. Dad came to your school plays? Philip's fork paused midway to his mouth. He missed all of mine. And my piano recitals, Rebecca added. Jonathan frowned. Maybe he was trying to do better with Gabriel, learn from his mistakes with us. Instead of the bitterness that would have accompanied such a statement days ago, Jonathan's voice held thoughtful reflection. Remember when Dad took us fishing at Lake Merritt? Philip suddenly asked. And Jonathan fell in the water trying to cast his line? Jonathan groaned. I was 7. You screamed like you were being eaten by sharks, Philip said, his lips twitching. It was a freshwater lake, Rebecca giggled. I know that now, Jonathan protested. But he was smiling too. Their laughter filled the small corner of the cafeteria. Gabriel watched in wonder as decades of tension seemed to melt away, if only temporarily. The siblings traded memories, correcting each other's versions of events, finishing each other's sentences. From across the cafeteria, Henry sat in a wheelchair with a nurse beside him, watching his family. Though too weak to join them, he'd insisted on seeing them together. A faint smile played on his pale lips. When dinner ended, Mr. Daniels suggested they visit Henry briefly before heading home. They walked together down the hallway, still chuckling over shared memories. Gabriel noticed Henry first. Mr. Whitmore, we were just coming to see you. Henry raised a trembling hand in greeting, his eyes bright with joy. He started to speak, then suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. Dad? Rebecca rushed forward. Henry slumped in his wheelchair, his body going limp as the nurse frantically pressed the emergency call button. Code Blue, room 307. a voice called over the intercom. Alarms blared through the corridor as medical staff rushed toward them, pushing the siblings aside. "Dad!" Jonathan shouted, his voice lost in the chaos of beeping machines and urgent commands. The siblings watched helplessly as doctors rushed Henry through the swinging doors of the intensive care unit. Everything moved in slow motion, the nurses barking orders, the squeak of gurney wheels, the flash of medical equipment. Then the doors closed, leaving them stranded in the sudden quiet of the hallway. "What just happened?" Philip's voice cracked. His usual confident demeanor had vanished. Rebecca pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "He was fine. He was just watching us." Jonathan paced the hallway, running his hands through his hair. "This can't be happening. Not now." Gabriel stood apart from them, his face ashen. He'd only just found his father. The thought of losing Henry now was unbearable. 2 hours crawled by before a doctor emerged. Her expression told them everything before she spoke a word. "Your father has suffered a severe cardiac event. We've stabilized him, but he's falling into a coma. The next 48 hours will be critical." The news hit them like a physical blow. They were permitted a brief visit, Henry lying motionless, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped and hummed, keeping him alive. Later, in the waiting room, Mr. Daniels arrived with a solemn expression. He carried his leather briefcase, which seemed heavier than before. "I need to speak with all of you about your father's will," he said quietly. Jonathan whirled toward him. "His will? He's not dead." "Nevertheless, there are conditions that must be addressed." Mr. Daniels opened his briefcase. "Your father anticipated this possibility. The final condition of inheritance is this: you must stand together in unity during this crisis. If you fracture now, the entire estate will be forfeited to charity." "Unity?" Philip scoffed. "That's vague legal language if I ever heard it." "Your father was quite specific," Daniels continued. He wrote, "If my children cannot stand together in my darkest hour, they will have proven themselves unworthy of my legacy." Rebecca's face flushed with anger. "So we're still being tested, even with Dad dying? This is ridiculous," Jonathan snapped. "I've jumped through enough hoops. I've done the community service. I've played his game." "Game?" Philip turned on his brother. "That's all this has been to you, hasn't it? Just another business transaction. As if you're any better." Jonathan shot back. "You've been calculating your shares since we got here." "Stop it," Rebecca shouted. "Both of you. Dad is lying there fighting for his life, and you're out here fighting over money." "The money that should have been ours years ago," Philip retorted, "if he hadn't been so stubborn." "Enough." Gabriel's quiet voice cut through their arguing. He'd been silent until now, watching from the corner. He stepped forward, standing tall despite his humble demeanor. "Your father isn't testing you," he said softly. "He's trying to save you." The siblings fell silent, staring at him. While you were growing up with everything you could want, he was working himself to exhaustion. While you were resenting his absence, he was building something that would secure your futures. And when you made mistakes, terrible, costly mistakes, he covered them without a word. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. He never asked for gratitude. He never asked for love. But right now, he's asking you to be a family, and you can't even do that for him. The words hung in the air, sharp with truth. No one spoke for a long moment. That night, the hospital chapel sat quiet and dim, illuminated only by flickering candles. The siblings sat in the front pew, a careful distance between them, heads bowed. Gabriel knelt before the small altar, his voice soft but clear in the stillness. "Lord, help this family find their way back to each other. And please, give Henry strength to see it happen." Dawn filtered through the stained glass windows of the hospital chapel, painting the worn wooden pews with splashes of blue and gold. The Whitmore siblings had spent the night there, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca's usually perfect hair hung limp around her face. Jonathan's suit was rumpled, his tie long discarded. Philip slumped forward, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. None of them had slept. Gabriel had left an hour earlier to check on Henry, promising to return with coffee. The silence between the siblings stretched thin, fragile as spun glass. Finally, Jonathan cleared his throat. "I hated how cold he was," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "When I made my first million, I called him, expecting, I don't know, pride? Congratulations? He just asked if I'd set up a proper investment structure. He laughed bitterly. I threw a party that weekend. Invited everyone except him. Rebecca wiped a tear from her cheek. After my first baby, I had terrible postpartum depression. I called mom's old friends, my college roommates, everyone but dad. I was drowning, and I couldn't bring myself to ask him for help because I knew he'd just write a check and walk away. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. But he did help, didn't he? The letter said he covered all my medical bills. He never even told me. Philip stood up suddenly and paced the small chapel. He was always so strict with me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Philip's voice shook. When I got arrested that time, I was sure he'd disown me. Instead, he bailed me out, drove me home in complete silence, and never mentioned it again. I thought he was ashamed. Maybe he just didn't know what to say, Rebecca offered softly. Maria told me something yesterday, Jonathan said. Dad never finished high school. Did either of you know that? His father died when he was 16, and he had to support his mother. Philip stopped pacing. You're kidding. The way he pushed education on us, because he never had it, Rebecca realized aloud. Everything he pushed on us, education, financial security, responsibility, they were all things he had to learn the hard way. He didn't know how to be affectionate, Jonathan said slowly. But he knew how to work, how to provide. That was his language of love, Rebecca whispered. Work, sacrifice, protection. Philip sank back into the pew, his anger deflating. I spent my whole life thinking he didn't care, but he was always there, cleaning up my messes, wasn't he? Mine too, Jonathan admitted. All of ours, Rebecca said. And we never thanked him. Not once. Jonathan reached over and took Rebecca's hand. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I was too busy trying to prove myself. Rebecca squeezed his hand, then extended her other one to Philip. I'm sorry I judged you both so harshly. I thought I was the only one hurting. Philip hesitated, then clasped both their hands. I'm sorry for pushing you all away, for being so angry all the time. Tears flowed freely now, years of resentment washing away in the morning light. For the first time since childhood, they held on to each other, not as rivals, but as family. The chapel door burst open. A breathless nurse stood there, her eyes wide. You need to come quickly, she gasped. It's your father, Mr. Whitmore's waking up. The ICU's harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as machines beeped a steady rhythm around Henry's bed. The Whitmore siblings rushed in, breathless, from their sprint through the hospital corridors, to find Gabriel already at their father's side. Henry's eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that had once commanded boardrooms, with a single glance fluttered open, cloudy but aware. His paper-thin skin stretched over hollow cheeks, and his once powerful frame seemed to disappear beneath the hospital blanket. Dad? Jonathan's voice cracked as he approached the bed. Henry's gaze shifted slowly toward his eldest son. His dry lips parted, struggling to form words. Rebecca leaned forward, gently taking her father's weathered hand in both of hers. We're all here, Daddy. Philip stood at the foot of the bed, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. The whole family, he managed. A flicker of confusion passed across Henry's face as he scanned each of their faces, lingering on Gabriel. His fingers twitched, reaching weakly toward him. Gabriel moved closer, his own eyes glistening. I'm here too. Henry's chest rose and fell with the effort of speaking. My children. Rebecca couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Dad, we're so sorry. We abandoned you when you needed us most. Jonathan stepped forward, placing his hand on his father's shoulder. We didn't understand. All these years, we thought you didn't care, but you were showing love the only way you knew how. Through sacrifice, Philip added, moving to stand beside his siblings. Through quiet protection. We forgive you, Dad, Rebecca whispered. And we've forgiven each other too. A single tear escaped Henry's eye, trailing down his temple into his silver hair. His lips curved into the faintest smile. That's all. Henry paused, gathering strength for each precious word I ever wanted. His gaze drifted to Gabriel, who had remained silent, watching this family healing with quiet reverence. Gabriel, Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. Gabriel leaned closer. Yes? Thank you. Henry's fingers twitched. reaching for Gabriel's hand, "for bringing them back to me." Gabriel gently took Henry's frail hand in his strong one. His voice trembled as he spoke the words he'd held inside for so many years. "Thank you for everything you did for my mother and me." "Father," the word hung in the air like a benediction. Henry closed his eyes, more tears escaping, but his face was peaceful, transformed by a joy none of them had ever seen there before. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Mr. Daniels entered, his normally composed face showing rare emotion as he took in the scene before him. For a moment, he simply stood there, briefcase clutched in his hands, watching the Whitmore family united around Henry's bed, Jonathan with his hand on his father's shoulder, Rebecca holding Henry's hand, Philip standing close with his arm around his sister, and Gabriel claiming his place among them. Daniels cleared his throat. "I came as soon as I heard Mr. Whitmore had regained consciousness." He approached the bed, his formal demeanor softening as he looked at Henry. "I believe I am witnessing the final condition of your will being fulfilled, old friend." Henry's eyes opened again, meeting Daniel's gaze with understanding. "The condition of true reconciliation," Daniels continued, addressing the room, "standing together as a family with love and forgiveness." He placed his briefcase on the side table with a decisive click. "The conditions have been met. All conditions." Henry's lips curved into a smile as his eyes drifted closed again, resting in the peace of a father whose children had finally come home. The hospital conference room felt too ordinary for such an extraordinary moment. Sunlight streamed through Venetian blinds, casting lined shadows across the polished oak table where the Whitmore siblings sat in stunned silence. Mr. Daniels stood at the head of the table, his posture perfect as always, though his eyes carried a warmth rarely seen in his professional demeanor. He placed a thick folder on the table, opening it with practiced precision. "As executor of your father's will, I can now officially confirm that all conditions have been met." His voice filled the quiet room. "The Whitmore estate, valued at $950 million, will pass to you three as primary heirs." The number hung in the air like an impossible dream. $950 million. Jonathan, who spent his life chasing wealth, merely stared at his folded hands. Rebecca pressed her fingertips to her lips, while Philip leaned back in his chair, looking more burdened than relieved. Gabriel sat slightly apart from the siblings, his presence both essential and uncertain. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the weight of the moment. After a long silence, Rebecca spoke first. "It doesn't feel right to just divide it." "No," Jonathan agreed, surprising everyone, including himself. "Money was always Dad's language, but I think he was trying to teach us something else entirely." Philip nodded slowly. "All those places we visited, the shelter, the Veterans Hospital, the youth center, they mattered to him. They were his real legacy," Jonathan said. "Not the buildings he developed or the wealth he accumulated." Rebecca turned toward Gabriel. "What do you think we should do?" Gabriel looked startled at being consulted. He glanced around the table, meeting each of their eyes before speaking. "I don't want any of it," he said softly. "The money, I mean. I never expected it, never needed it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "All I ever wanted was to know my father, and now, maybe, to have a family." The simple honesty of his words seemed to break something open in the room. Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. "You are family," she said firmly. "Blood or not, you are our brother." "She's right," Philip added, his usual cynicism nowhere to be found. "You showed more loyalty to our father than we ever did." Jonathan leaned forward. "And we want you involved in every decision going forward, especially about the foundation." "Foundation?" Gabriel asked. Jonathan nodded, warming to the idea forming between them. "To carry on what Dad started, supporting the causes he believed in, but quietly, just like he did. The veterans, the homeless families, the kids who need a chance," Philip added. "With you helping guide us," Rebecca said to Gabriel. "You understand people in a way we're only beginning to learn." Gabriel's eyes grew damp. "I would be honored." Mr. Daniels, who had been watching this exchange with quiet approval, closed his folder with a soft thud. The siblings looked up, having almost forgotten his presence. "May I say something?" he asked, his formal tone softening. "I served your father for over 30 years. In all that time, I never saw him as satisfied as when he finalized these conditions for his will. His gaze swept over them all, including Gabriel. Your father wanted this all along, Daniel said, a rare smile transforming his stern face. Not just the inheritance passing to you, but this seeing his children united, thinking beyond themselves, understanding the true value of his legacy. For the first time since entering the conference room, the weight of inheritance felt not like a burden, but like a gift they could share together. A week later, autumn sunshine bathed Henry's mansion in golden light as the Whitmore siblings gathered in their father's study. The room, with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, felt different now. No longer imposing, but somehow welcoming, as if Henry's spirit lingered in approval. Jonathan stood by the wide bay window, papers spread across their father's desk. Rebecca sat in one of the leather armchairs, a laptop balanced on her knees, while Philip paced the oriental rug, unusually thoughtful. Gabriel entered last, hesitating briefly at the doorway. "Come in," Rebecca called, looking up with a smile. "We can't start without you." Gabriel stepped into the room, still feeling the strange newness of belonging. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions and planning, all leading to this moment. "I've had the lawyers draft everything," Jonathan said, gesturing to the stack of documents. "The Whitmore Legacy of Love Foundation official as soon as we sign." Philip stopped pacing and picked up one of the papers. $50 million for veterans rehabilitation programs, he read aloud. Another $40 million for homeless family housing initiatives, and $30 million for youth education and mentorship, Rebecca added. "Just like Dad did for you. Gabriel, only now it won't be in secret." Gabriel ran his fingers along the edge of Henry's desk. He never wanted recognition. That's what made him special. "And that's exactly how we'll honor him," Jonathan said firmly. "The foundation will operate quietly, focusing on results, not publicity." Rebecca nodded. "We'll evaluate each project personally. No bureaucracy, no red tape, just direct help to people who need it." Philip dropped into a chair, a hint of his old skepticism returning. "You realize this means actual work, right? Not just signing checks." "That's the point," Jonathan replied. "We'll be involved, present, the way Dad should have been with us." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "He did his best," Gabriel said softly, "in his own way." Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand. "And we'll do better, because of what he taught us, both through his successes and his mistakes." Philip leaned forward. "There's one more thing." He slid a document across the desk toward Gabriel. "We want you as co-director. Equal voice, equal say in all foundation decisions." Gabriel stared at the paper. "But I'm not." "Your family," Jonathan interrupted. "And frankly, you understand people better than any of us. You bridge worlds," Rebecca added, "between wealth and need, between past and future." Gabriel looked from face to face, seeing sincerity in each set of eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Philip urged, with unexpected gentleness. Gabriel nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Yes." Jonathan gathered the founding documents and laid them in the center of Henry's desk. One by one, they each took a pen, Henry's pens, from the ornate holder he'd used for decades. Jonathan signed first, his usual confident scrawl now measured and deliberate. Rebecca followed, her signature elegant but strong. Philip hesitated only briefly before adding his name with unexpected care. Then Gabriel stepped forward last. As his pen touched the paper, sunlight broke through the clouds outside, flooding the room with warmth. He signed his full name, Gabriel Whitmore, claiming his place in this family at last. The four siblings stood together around their father's desk, hands resting on the documents that would carry Henry's true legacy forward. Not buildings or bank accounts, but compassion. Not wealth, but love. Outside the window, autumn leaves danced in the breeze, golden and free. 2 days after establishing the foundation, the Whitmore family returned to St. Joseph's Hospital. Henry had taken a turn for the worse overnight. The doctor's words hung in the air, hours, perhaps, not days. "He's asking to go outside," the nurse told them gently, "into the garden." Gabriel pushed the wheelchair while Maria walked alongside, her hand resting lightly on Henry's shoulder. The three siblings followed, their footsteps hesitant on the polished hospital floor. Outside, Autumn had painted the hospital garden in amber and gold. A light breeze carried the scent of late roses and damp earth. "There," Henry whispered, pointing with a trembling finger toward a small gazebo nestled among maple trees. They settled beneath its wooden shelter. Sunlight filtered through red gold leaves, casting dappled patterns across Henry's pale face. A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, its bright plumage a splash of life against the autumn backdrop. "Listen," Henry murmured. "The birds." They sat in silence, the gentle chorus of birdsong filling the space between them. Henry's breathing came shallow but peaceful, his gaze fixed on the dance of leaves overhead. "I never took time for this," he said, each word measured and deliberate, always rushing, building, working. He closed his eyes briefly. "What a fool I was." Rebecca knelt beside his chair and took his hand. "You gave us everything, Dad." "Not everything." Henry's voice grew stronger for a moment. "Not my presence, not my heart." "You're here now," Jonathan said, his usual confidence softened by emotion. "We're all here." Henry nodded slowly. His eyes moved from face to face, lingering on each one as if memorizing them. "I can rest now," he whispered. "My children have come home." Philip, who had been standing slightly apart, stepped forward and touched his father's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything." Henry reached up with trembling fingers and covered Philip's hand with his own. "No more regrets," he said. "Only forgiveness." Maria wiped tears from her cheeks, watching the family she had served for decades finally heal before her eyes. "Maria," Henry called, his voice growing fainter. "Thank you for your loyalty, for raising our son with such grace." She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Henry turned to Gabriel last. "My boy," he said. "My good boy." Gabriel knelt beside the wheelchair. "Father," he said simply. A smile touched Henry's lips. "Take care of them," he whispered. "They're learning, but they need you." "I will," Gabriel promised. The cardinal called from its perch, a clear, piercing note that seemed to hang in the air. Henry's face relaxed, the lines of pain and worry smoothing away. "I never said it enough," he murmured, "but I love you, all of you." He drew one last deep breath, gazed up at the canopy of autumn leaves, and with a gentle sigh, closed his eyes. The smile remained on his lips as his hand went limp in Rebecca's grasp. "Dad?" she whispered, but they all knew he was gone. For a moment, no one moved. Then Rebecca began to cry, soft, broken sobs that shook her shoulders. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her, his own tears falling freely. Philip turned away, but his shaking shoulders betrayed his grief. Gabriel reached for Maria, pulling her close as she wept against his chest. Then, without words, they all moved together, arms encircling one another in the dappled light of the gazebo. United in grief, but also in love, the Whitmore family held each other as the autumn breeze whispered through the garden and the cardinal sang its farewell. Morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Street-Mark's Episcopal Church, casting jewel-toned patterns across the worn wooden pews. The historic Whitmore family church, which Henry had quietly funded the restoration of years earlier, overflowed with mourners. They came from all walks of life. Elderly veterans in dress uniforms, families from the shelter clutching handmade sympathy cards, business leaders in somber suits, and hospital staff still in scrubs. The pews filled quickly, leaving many standing along the walls and spilling out into the foyer. Jonathan stood at the entrance, shaking hands with those who arrived. The sight of so many unfamiliar faces startled him. "I didn't know my father knew so many people," he whispered to Rebecca as she joined him. "I don't think he did not personally," she replied, watching an elderly woman place flowers at the base of Henry's portrait. "But his generosity touched them all." Philip approached, straightening his tie. "Who are all these people?" "Dad's true legacy," Gabriel answered, stepping up beside them. "The lives he changed." The organ began to play, and the siblings made their way to the front pew. Mr. Daniels nodded to them from across the aisle, where he sat beside Maria, whose eyes were red-rimmed but dry. The service began with the pastor's warm remembrance, followed by Jonathan, who stepped to the pulpit first. "My father built an empire," he began, his voice uncharacteristically humble. But I never understood until this week that his greatest achievement wasn't in brick and steel, but in the quiet ways he helped others. He paused, swallowing hard. I spent years resenting his absence, never seeing that he was showing love the only way he knew how. Rebecca spoke next, her fingers trembling on the edges of the pulpit. My father never said I love you out loud, she said. But he paid for my son's medical treatment when insurance wouldn't cover it. He never once mentioned it. Her voice broke. I wish I thanked him. When Philip took his turn, the church fell silent. His reputation for bitterness was well known. I was the problem child, he admitted bluntly. Always in trouble. Always angry. What I never knew until this week was that my father bailed me out of every mess I made legal trouble. Debts, bad decisions, all without a word of blame. He looked down, then directly at the crowd. I thought he didn't care. I was wrong. Gabriel was the last to speak. He stood tall at the pulpit, his gentle presence commanding attention. Without demanding it, Henry Whitmore was my father, he said simply, though I didn't know it for most of my life. He supported my mother and me from the shadows, never seeking recognition or thanks. Gabriel's gaze swept across the congregation. Looking at all of you today, I realized he was a father not just to me, but to many. Each of you carries a piece of his quiet generosity. Gabriel gestured toward the veterans, the shelter families, the community members. Together, we are his true family. Together, we will carry forward his legacy of love. As Gabriel stepped down, an elderly veteran in the third row slowly rose to his feet. Others followed, first one, then dozens, then everyone, until the entire church stood in silent tribute. The applause began softly, then swelled, echoing through the sacred space as tears flowed freely. The Whitmore siblings stood together at the front, hands clasped, watching in wonder as their father received the recognition he'd never sought in life, but so richly deserved in death. Autumn sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Rebecca's lakeside home, warming the spacious living room where laughter, once a rare sound in Whitmore family gatherings, now flowed freely. 6 weeks had passed since Henry's funeral, and the siblings had gathered for their now regular Sunday afternoon together. You did not, Rebecca gasped, nearly spilling her tea as Jonathan finished his story. I absolutely did, Jonathan insisted, eyes crinkling with mirth. Dad caught me trying to sneak that frog into Mrs. Harrington's purse at the charity gala. Instead of punishing me, he just said, "Son, if you're going to cause trouble, at least be clever about it." Philip lounged on the sofa, his usual sharp edges softened. Remember the summer he taught us to sail? I capsized the boat 3 times in one afternoon. 4 times, Rebecca corrected, smiling. I counted because I got dunked every single time. Gabriel sat quietly among them, absorbing these stories of the father he'd never truly known. Each memory shared felt like a small gift, pieces of Henry that helped complete the puzzle of who he had been. Maria entered from the kitchen, carrying a tray of fresh-baked cookies. Once the housekeeper, she now moved among them as family. "Maria, these smell incredible," Gabriel said, jumping up to help her set down the heavy tray. "Your father loved these," she said softly. "I made them every Christmas." "Well, we don't need to wait for Christmas anymore," Rebecca declared, reaching for one. She had cleared her busy social calendar to make these Sundays sacred, prioritizing family over appearances for the first time in decades. At the coffee table, Philip and Jonathan pored over blueprints for the new Veterans Rehabilitation Center, the first major project of the Whitmore Legacy of Love Foundation. Their former competition for their father's approval had transformed into genuine collaboration. "If we expand this wing," Philip suggested, pointing to the plans, "we could add 10 more beds." Jonathan nodded. "And Gabriel's idea for the community garden here makes perfect sense." Gabriel looked up, still surprised whenever his input was valued. Growing up on the periphery of the Whitmore wealth, he never imagined finding true belonging within it. "Mom," Rebecca's teenage daughter called from the doorway, "is dinner almost ready? I'm starving." "Ask your Aunt Maria," Rebecca replied with natural ease. "She's the chef tonight." Maria beamed at being called aunt, a small word that represented an enormous shift in the family dynamic. As evening approached, they gathered around Rebecca's dining table, now extended to its full length to accommodate the growing family circle. Partners, children, and even a few close friends had joined them. Candles flickered in the center, casting a golden glow over the feast Maria had prepared. Gabriel looked around the table at these people who had once been strangers to each other despite sharing blood. Now they passed dishes, family style, their hands briefly touching in the simple communion of a shared meal. The stiffness of formal Whitmore dinners was gone, replaced by comfortable chaos as multiple conversations overlapped. "I think Dad would have loved this," Rebecca said quietly to Gabriel as they watched Philip teaching Jonathan's son how to properly twirl spaghetti on his fork. Gabriel nodded. He would have. This was what he wanted all along, not just the charity work, but this, us, together. Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Welcome home, brother." The word home settled over Gabriel like a warm blanket. In this moment, surrounded by newfound family, the empty space his unknown father had left in his heart finally felt complete. The room hummed with conversation and laughter, but more than that, with the unmistakable warmth of belonging. A cool spring breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and newly turned soil across the grounds of what had once been an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Now, transformed with gleaming windows and a welcoming facade, the Whitmore Veterans Rehabilitation Center stood ready for its grand opening. Hundreds gathered on the freshly laid lawn, veterans in pressed uniforms, families with excited children, community leaders, and volunteers who had worked tirelessly alongside the Whitmore siblings for months. A red ribbon stretched across the entrance, waiting to be cut. "I never thought I'd be more nervous about opening a rehab center than closing $1 million deal," Jonathan whispered, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. Philip nudged his brother's shoulder. "That's because this actually matters." Rebecca stood beside them in a simple blue dress, a far cry from the designer outfits she once insisted on for public appearances. "Dad would be proud," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Gabriel joined them at the ribbon, carrying the oversized ceremonial scissors. Unlike his siblings, he wore no formal attire, just clean jeans and a button-down shirt, clothes more familiar to the veterans they'd be serving. "Ready?" he asked. The 4 of them positioned themselves at the ribbon, hands overlapping on the scissors. The crowd fell silent as Mr. Daniels stepped to the microphone. 6 months ago, this project was just a condition in a will, he said. Today, it stands as proof that legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched. At a signal, the siblings cut the ribbon together. Cheers erupted as red, white, and blue balloons soared into the clear sky. An elderly veteran in a wheelchair approached them first, his medals glinting in the sunlight. "My grandson will get treatment here," he said, voice gruff with emotion. "When you've seen what war does to a young mind, well, you gave us hope today." Philip, once so dismissive of others' struggles, knelt beside the man's wheelchair. "Sir, the honor is ours." A group of children from the shelter where Rebecca now volunteered weekly rushed forward with handmade bouquets. "These are for you, Miss Rebecca," a little girl called out, presenting wildflowers tied with ribbon. Rebecca accepted them with genuine delight, no longer concerned about appearing perfect. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." Jonathan found himself surrounded by young men from the financial literacy program he'd started. One handed him a card signed by dozens of students. "Because of what you taught us, my mom kept her house," the young man said. "That's worth more than money." Jonathan swallowed hard, remembering how he'd once measured his worth by the size of his bank account. "You did that," he replied. "I just showed you how." Gabriel watched his siblings with quiet pride. These were not the same people who had stormed out of their father's hospital room months ago. They had discovered what he had always known, that true fulfillment came from giving, not taking. As the crowd moved inside to tour the facility, Mr. Daniels guided them to the entrance where a covered plaque waited. "There's one more thing Henry wanted," he said. Together, they removed the covering to reveal polished bronze letters that caught the sunlight. "In loving memory of Henry Whitmore, a legacy of love." Below were smaller words that brought tears to their eyes. "And in honor of Jonathan, Rebecca, Philip, and Gabriel, who found their way home." Gabriel touched the plaque gently. "He knew," he whispered. "He knew we'd get here." Rebecca slipped her arm through his. "He gave us the map. We just had to be brave enough to follow it." As they stood together before their father's memorial, the siblings shared a moment of silent gratitude for the inheritance that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. 6 months after the rehabilitation center's opening, autumn painted the trees outside the Whitmore Foundation headquarters in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Inside the spacious conference room, blueprints and proposals covered the polished oak table where the 4 siblings sat surrounded by coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches. The shelter in Millfield can be ready by spring if we break ground next month, Gabriel said, tapping a site plan with his pencil. His simple approach to leadership had proven invaluable. He connected with people others couldn't reach and saw opportunities where others saw only problems. Jonathan nodded, calculator in hand. The numbers work. We can fund it without touching the endowment. He'd surprised everyone, especially himself, by finding deep satisfaction in teaching financial literacy to families struggling with debt. His business acumen, once used solely for profit, now created pathways to stability for others. What about the scholarship program? Rebecca asked, sorting through applications. The stack of folders represented single mothers seeking education, women whose stories echoed her own struggles. Her weekly mentoring sessions had become the highlight of her calendar, replacing charity galas and social appearances. Philip leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the empty chair. The military position he'd once rejected now shaped his veteran support initiatives. Got 20 more vets signed up for housing assistance this month. 2 already found jobs through the center. Dad would have loved seeing this, Rebecca said softly, glancing at the photo of Henry that hung on the wall, not the formal portrait from his office, but the candid shot Maria had given them, showing him with sleeves rolled up, planting a tree years ago. Remember how we used to fight over who'd get the biggest share? Philip chuckled, shaking his head at the memory. And now we argue over who gets to help more people, Jonathan added, genuine wonder in his voice. Gabriel gathered the blueprints, smiling at his siblings. I think we've earned a break. Sun's setting, let's watch it from the balcony. They stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The foundation offices occupied the top floor of what had once been Henry's corporate headquarters, now transformed into a place of giving rather than taking. The balcony offered a sweeping view of the city below, where lights began twinkling on as dusk settled. Hard to believe it's been almost a year, Jonathan said, resting his hands on the railing. Sometimes I still expect Dad to walk through the door and check our work, Philip admitted. Gabriel stood quietly beside them, his presence a steady reminder of the bridge their father had tried to build long before any of them understood. Rebecca took Gabriel's hand, then reached for Philip's. One by one, they formed a circle, connected by touch and by something deeper that had grown between them, something that felt remarkably like family. We abandoned him once, Rebecca whispered, her voice catching on the evening breeze, but he never abandoned us. The words hung in the autumn air, simple but profound. Not once, Philip agreed, squeezing her hand. He knew us better than we knew ourselves, Jonathan added. Gabriel looked up at the first star appearing in the darkening sky. He's watching, you know, probably planning the next project we haven't thought of yet. They laughed softly, faces turned upward toward the deepening twilight. No one needed to say what they all felt that somewhere. Henry Whitmore was indeed watching his children, not with disappointment or regret, but with a quiet pride of a father whose greatest wish had finally come true. His fortune had built an empire, but his wisdom had built something far more precious, a family bound by love instead of obligation, by choice instead of duty. And that was the greatest legacy of all. If you enjoyed the story of Henry Whitmore, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.